Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Hello and welcome to the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. We'll get straight on with the agenda by first off receiving apologies for absence. And as I understand it, we have apologies from Councillor Phil Murphy, and Councillor Bob Greenland needs to leave at 3 o'clock, if I'm correct.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Thank you, Bob. I'm not aware of any apologies, so we will move on. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest to be notified, please? I'm assuming that's a no, so we'll mark that as nil and we'll move on. The third item is the public open forum. And as I understand it, members of the public wishing to participate in this meeting are required to notify their intention in advance. No such notifications have been received, and therefore we can move on. Item 4 is to note the action list from a previous meeting. I think I'm quite pleased to see that there are no open actions, which I think reflects good meeting discipline. However, I do believe that there's one matter arising, and Peter Davis wishes to sort of advise us of that.
Thank you, Chair. Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive. I just wanted to take the opportunity, I guess, Chair, what with a new administration coming into play and the former Chair, Philip White, standing down at the end of the last administrative term, but through you, Chair, and to the committee at large, just an ask really as to whether they see the benefit of a letter of thanks being drawn up, and through you, Chair, obviously being sent to Philip White. But I'll leave it to you, Chair, to take views on that from the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. That sounds like a very sensible idea. Looking to members for any views. Please, Councillor Tony Eason.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I echo the comments of Peter, and yes, we should respect the last 5 years. I think it was the user chair, very good chair, and I hope he will live up to his chairmanship. Thank you.
No pressure. Thank you, Tony. Any other comments, please? I assume we don't have to take a vote on that, so let us assume that that is carried. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to the substance of this committee meeting, and that being first item here is item 5, the Audit Wales work programme, and I believe it's going to be introduced by Charlotte Owen of Audit Wales. Charlotte, in introducing the paper, so please be clear as to its purpose for the committee, and then let's just assume that we have read the paper, so please pull out those points of particular importance. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So for those who are not familiar with this document, Audit Wales produces a quarterly update on our work programme, which we share with officers and you, the committee, for information purposes. So this particular update provides the position at the end of March. So slightly out of date now, given this is the first committee meeting since it was issued to the Council back in April. So it sets out the work completed during that quarter and also the work underway and upcoming for both our financial and our performance audit work programmes. It also includes a summary from Eston and CIW and details of any national reports that have been published by Audit Wales. So I just wanted to draw your attention to the outstanding 21-22 performance audit work programme, just to give you a couple of updates since this was issued. So we'll be issuing our draft report for our springing forward review on workforce and assets next week to officers. We'll also be issuing a summary report over the summer on our assurance and risk assessment work, which has been looking at the Council's financial position, its preparations to meet the requirements of the Local Government and Elections Act, and its work on carbon reduction plans. So I'd anticipate that those reports will come through to you possibly in the September committee meeting, depending on agenda availability. There's also a local risk-based project, which we've not determined yet. Conversations will be going on with the council over the next month or so to finalise arrangements for that. And again, we'll update you on that at a future meeting. So just to let you know again that this is a quarterly update. So the next update will be issuing to the council in July, and that will come through to you at a future committee meeting. And also, a difference between this current one and the next one that you'll see is the The Q1 one will include the 22-23 work programme that's upcoming, which is also set out in today's audit plan, which is later on in today's agenda. I don't think there's really anything else to sort of point out to you, but very happy to take any questions if you've got any.
Thank you, Charlotte. Questions or comments for Charlotte, please? No, I think you've got off lightly. So thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair.
In that case, we'll move on to item 6. Item 6 is the annual governance statement, quite a weighty document, and this paper is being introduced by Andrew Woffin, our Chief Internal Auditor. Andrew, when introducing the paper, could you just be clear in terms of what you most value from this committee? And then clearly, in doing so, just assume that we have read the paper, but given its length and its nature, perhaps you could talk us through it slowly and carefully and pull out those key points. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So the annual governance statement is an annual report which I bring into Governance and Audit Committee. This is based on our position for 21-22 and feeds into the financial statements we have to prepare on an annual basis. This is the draft version, so there will be an updated version later on in the year. But from a committee's perspective, it gives you an opportunity to contribute to the governance arrangements which we have in the organisation, to make sure that I've covered everything from your understanding of our organisation, and to make sure that if not, we can add things in due course in terms of pre-finalisation. So the governance statement is a standard document which we are required to include within our statement of accounts. Is prepared in accordance with SIPFA Solis, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, and the Society of Local Authority Chief Execs and Senior Managers, based on a document called Delivering Good Governance in Local Government, Framework 2016. And there's a slant towards Welsh local authorities within that. So there's a standard expectation to demonstrate that we do have good governance across the organisation, and that's based on the 7 principles of governance which are laid out on paragraph 5.1. The statement itself goes into detail of how we comply with those 7 principles, how the organisation delivers good governance, and what controls it has in place to demonstrate good governance, and make sure that we're in line with our Code of Corporate Governance, a document which has come through the former Audit Committee and been approved by Cabinet. That is the backbone of how we demonstrate corporate governance within Monmouthshire. It's the Code of Corporate Governance, and this annual governance statement just gives you assurance that we are compliant with our code and demonstrates with some examples how we do that on a regular basis throughout the year. As the Chair says, it is quite a lengthy document, so I do not intend to go through it line by line, but it hopefully will give you assurances as members that we have appropriate and relevant governance processes in place within the year. We're all aware of the pandemic, and we're coming out of the pandemic in 21-22, and it's reassuring to note that that Monmouthshire maintained good governance arrangements across the board in all key areas during that time period. We do take into account a number of aspects with my internal audit hat on, and the assurance that we will give to members about the work we've undertaken, that's incorporated within the statement itself as well. So we make sure that we cover the effectiveness of those governance arrangements. That's set out in paragraph 32. And that's about reporting in an open, transparent way, because at the end of the day, governance is about doing the right thing at the right time for the right people. And obviously demonstrating that in a transparent way within the public arena. So we also take into account any complaints which we have within the organisation, any FOI requests, etc. That's incorporated within the statement itself. And we rely on other officers within the organisation to provide that data, which then feeds into the statement. I mentioned the opinions which I will provide to Audit Committee, Governance and Audit Committee within my annual plan. But my overall opinion for 21-22, based on all the work we've undertaken, is that the controls in place are reasonable. So we're saying that there are weaknesses which we've identified, but managers have agreed to implement those to make improvements across the board in terms of service provision. The number of opinions and the type of opinions we've issued from an internal audit team are set out in paragraph 49 in the table. So the overall summary is that we do have good governance arrangements in place. We maintain good governance arrangements in place throughout the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. As you can see from the action plan, the previous issues have been addressed, and there are minor issues in the action plan for 21-22. It's not complete yet because we're still draft, and I will take on board comment from committee members and other senior officers as we progress into a finalisation of the document. Ultimately, it will need to be signed off by the leader and the chief exec to give the overall assurance that they're happy with the governance arrangements in place as well. Chair, as I said, I don't intend going through any detail, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Can I just clarify what you want the committee to do at this stage? Is it a matter of wordsmith provide us the advice and guidance on what's said, or something else, please?
Okay, thanks, Chair. It's to help shape the governance statement. If there's anything that I may have missed from your understanding of how the organisation works and what governance arrangements are in place, or any key risks that you are aware of that are not included within the governance statement, then obviously I need to be aware of that. It has gone through some chief officers for a draft review, so hopefully we've picked up all the key issues, but it is, as I say, still draft, Chair, so happy to take on board any comments to help shape it to make it an even better document.
Thank you, very clear. So members, questions or comments for Andrew, please? Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew, it's a really good read, actually. I like the way it's set out. It tends to otherwise be by focus, and I think this is really helpful. Just going back to it's hard, I mean, as a new lay member, it's very hard to say whether it's representative of the organisation or not, but it's a good read, as it. You said that we're in a good place, and I don't disagree with you. However, I come back to paragraph 49, where you say the overall opinion is reasonable. I flip over the page and I see the categories listed where you say substantial is very good, considerable is good, reasonable there's no real commentary alongside that, and limited is unsatisfactory. So I kind of wonder whether you're using the same scale to come to the overall opinion, because I would have thought you said good, and good equates as considerable assurance, and so I'm just kind of interested how that works out.
Thank you. These are based on my audit opinions, my internal audit opinions. The governance statement is based on a much wider aspect than that. So it's it does feed into the overall opinion in terms of my good assessment for annual governance statement, but it also takes into consideration non-audit issues across the board. And I've given examples within the content of the actual report where we've demonstrated good governance. So it's a wider aspect than just the internal audit opinions.
But that's exactly my point. Just to come back, if I can, that's exactly my point. If it is good, then over on the table, the following page, good says equals to considerable. So I just wonder why you aren't saying in paragraph 49, my overall opinion is a considerable assurance opinion.
Yeah, that paragraph relates only to my internal audit opinions.
Okay, in that case, we need to have a definition of what you mean by that, because if the paragraph stands by itself, it isn't connected to the table over the page, then we need to have what does reasonable mean? And if you're saying good, that kind of helps explain to the reader.
Okay, Chair, I'll take that point on board and I'll make sure that's clarified for members.
Thank you. Colin.
Yes, Andrew, I was just going to say, on paragraph 51, it says, despite reduced resources, 64% of the audit plan was achieved, which was 7% up on the previous year. And I wondered, do you benchmark or consider that against similar councils? Is that a good figure of assurance?
Thank you. Yes, we do. There's a group across Wales called the Welsh Chief Auditors Group, and the PIs which we use within the internal audit team have been pulled together, can be compiled from agreement from current posts to myself across Wales, so 22 chief internal auditors, and we do an annual performance assessment across the board. So we do an average, so we can see where we are in terms of benchmarking. But we, from an individual authority's point of view, we know where we are along that scale of 22. And I can provide that information into committee if you're interested in that, but we would anonymise the other authorities.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Please, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andrew. On paragraph, put my glasses on, half and half. On paragraph 48, you talk about fraudulent activities during COVID. At a previous audit meeting in the last number of months, you came to us with a report of the level of fraud that you were investigating. Do you have an update of where we are today? Because you just say there's limited assurance. Are there any outstanding matters which has resulted from the fraud over the pandemic period? This is to do with grants and things like that which are drawn.
Okay, thank you. In terms of paragraph 48, that does talk about the fraud which we were involved with COVID grants. That work has come to a halt. As I've reported into committee previously, any key concerns we had have been reported into the police. We haven't had any feedback as a result of that. But what it does say that we work through the audit plan, and we've identified 20 internal audit opinions, and we've identified that of those 20, only 2 were limited. So it's not an overall opinion of where we are in terms of fraud. It's saying that we've done some work on fraud. What the opinion associated within that paragraph is not related to that fraud work.
Further questions or comments, please? Martin again.
Just a couple of things which caught my eye going through the report. These are not really questions about, but they kind of stimulate further thought. Paragraphs 104 and 106 talk about the policies and procedures we have in place around managing risks. And they relate to the documents and last reviews, which are quite old now, I guess. It says July 2017, and the anti-fraud policy was 2015. Usually I'd expect to see them being a bit refreshed. I know we've been through COVID, etc., but I wonder whether these are things we could put onto the work plan going forward. Thanks.
Yes. Yes is the simple answer. Yeah, they are reviewed on a regular basis. Regular is an interesting definition. It depends on the resources we have in the team, and over the last couple of years we obviously knew one of COVID, the team got repurposed and had to concentrate on dealing with anti-fraud grants, and then we've been catching up in 21-22. So unfortunately, the revision of policies and statements have been put on the back burner, but we will look to review them and bring them back into Governance and Audit Committee at some stage, Chair.
It might help the reader of the document if we said something along the lines they do for review in 22-23. That might help people along the way. Or is that setting a line in the sand you don't particularly want to put?
I think that's a very fair question, but it does depend on the resources we've got in the team, and we will concentrate on providing as much audit work as we possibly can, and that will fall to me and my manager. And unfortunately, at the moment, I've got a vacancy within my manager's role.
And one last one, if I may, Chair. Sorry, Peter. Paragraph 127 talks about online privacy notices, and it says significant work is underway through 21-22. I think just wordsmithing it, because this is written obviously after 21-22. It either was or whatever the language needs to be just to amend that.
Yeah, fair point, Chair. I'll take that on board. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Just come back to Martin's first substantive point. So in terms of the forward work programme of the committee, I'll be looking to bring forward, in terms of designated responsibilities for matters of fraud and anti-fraud, bribery and corruption, that sits with me. I've got the Chief Officer designation for that. I'm required annually to bring a risk assessment through to the committee on such matters. So that'll either be for the July meeting or it'll come to the meeting after the summer recess. I think, given the comment, which I think is a fair one, and obviously matters of, we've got a draft governance statement with us at the moment. I'll take up a conversation with Andrew just in terms of the preparatory work I'll do on the drafting of that report to come forward, such that maybe we can draw some conclusion in terms of the review dates for those policies as part of the risk assessment. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. For the record, I suppose I should note that I've already provided a small number of comments to Andrew on the statement, and he's looking at those as appropriate. I suppose one additional point for me is in the wording of the annual governance statement. If I turn to the executive summary, the final sentence in that paragraph, and I'll paraphrase, we have demonstrated for the majority of areas we have effective governance arrangements in place. And then it goes on to say, but there's further work to do, etc., etc. That gives the impression that some of our governance arrangements are less than effective. That may or may not be the case. But Andrew, are you able to give a view now, or do you need to take that away?
Chair, thanks. I think that's a valid point. We're always looking to improve our governance arrangements, so there's always room to improve. As a statement is presented today, it demonstrates that we have good governance arrangements in place. We probably haven't covered all the bases, and there's some things we probably still need to top and tail, but I will take that point away and reflect on it, and we'll report back accordingly.
Thank you. And if the committee has further feedback they wish to give, are you able to receive that, and if so, up until what time?
Thanks, Chair. ASAP would be good. John's got a deadline for pulling the accounts together, which I think is the end of July.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, we're due to hand over at the moment to Audit Wales on the 14th of July, so it would be helpful if we could get comments together to feed into that date. Obviously, the papers would need to be distributed a little bit earlier than that, but yeah, that'd be really helpful.
So, Chair, I would say on that basis, by the end of this month, please, if anybody's got any comments to me.
Thank you. And if members have comments, if you could provide them directly to Andrew, I think would be most appreciated. From what I've heard so far, I think we are in broad agreement that the statement as currently drafted provides a reasonable reflection of the state of governance and control across the authority, and we should have some real sort of confidence in that. And clearly we will need to make that recommendation in terms of the Council adopting that statement in due course, is my understanding of the next step of the process. Thank you. If we're happy, I suggest we move on to item 7. Item 7 is the annual audit plan from Audit Wales. This will be introduced by Rachel Freitag of Audit Wales. Rachel, in introducing a paper, please assume that we have read it, of course, but draw out those key matters of particular interest to the committee. Those matters, in my estimation, would be the timetable for the year-end audit, possibly highlighting any matters which are arising or potential areas of concern at this early stage. And then also, as well, from my personal perspective, talk to the item labelled Assurance and Risk Assessment. in particular, what the role of this committee would be in regards to that item and how this committee would engage with that piece of work. Thank you, Rachel.
Great, thank you, Chair. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Financial Audit Manager for Audit Wales for Monmouthshire County Council, and Charlotte, who's also on the line, who will chip in for the performance audit sections, is the Performance Audit Lead at Audit Wales. So the audit plan really just gives an overview of the work that we're planning to do during the year. It's really for noting and just to provide information, and we will update you as work is completed on the outcomes of the work. I'll highlight the key sections as we go through the document. It's quite a standard format. You'll see each year as we go through the term, you should become fairly familiar with this document. It doesn't change much from year to year in terms of standard, the layout, etc. It really is just the substance that changes. Initially it talks to our powers and duties, and then comes on to the audit of the financial statements. So just to make it really clear, we don't seek absolute assurance when we're looking at the financial statements. We work to a level of materiality. So this is the level where we think an error would sort of mislead or change the user's opinion of the financial position of the authority. At planning and interim, this level was around £3 million. We will confirm that level when we get the draft financial statement, as it's based on a figure in the accounts. That's how we calculate it. The sort of key section I wanted to focus on really was looking at the financial statement audit risks, and just to run those through with you and provide a bit of context. So the first one is sort of management overrider controls. This is something that's present in all organisations, that management, given their influence, could override the system of controls in place. This is non-rebuttable, this risk, so it is present in all of our audited bodies. You're not unique by having this risk in the audit plan, and we do complete sort of specific work to mitigate that, looking at material manual journals, reviewing accounting estimates for any bias, and look at any sort of significant transactions that appear to be outside the normal course of business. The next risk then is probably going to be the big ticket item, I would say, for this year's audit, is the valuation of the authority's assets. So I'm sure you're all aware, sort of prices of properties have been skyrocketing lately. Monmouthshire County Council is not immune to that. So the council adopts a 5-year rolling programme of valuations. So each asset is revalued once within a 5-year period, which is allowable by the CIPFA Code of Accounting. However, the code also requires that the carrying value of assets as at the balance sheet date are materially in line with the current value. So given, inflationary pressures, etc. at the moment, there is a risk that those assets valued 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago are held at a value that's materially different to what the current value is. So we've been working, we've been in discussions with local authorities. I know Peter's been at our meetings with the Society of Welsh Treasurers to work through an approach here to make sure that the assets are materially correct at year end. We are currently thinking there's some sort of indexation to uplift those values as the way forward, but I know CIPFA have raised some concerns and some points of clarification, and those discussions are still ongoing. So I'm sure this will feature quite heavily in our report of audit findings when that comes to you. So we'll make sure you're kept abreast of that one. And the next two risks are related to COVID. I'll touch on these, lightly. In terms of completing the audit, we didn't have any sort of significant difficulties with Monmouthshire. Evidence was provided to us electronically pre-pandemic. I suppose the biggest issue really was staff being redeployed to help out with other areas. So whilst that has sort of dissipated now, obviously there's a backlog on both the authority and our front in terms of catching up with work. So we're hoping to bring, completions of audits sort of forward to October this year, just to try and get back on an even kilter in completing audit work. And the final one is the funding stream. So I'm sure you're aware Welsh Government have provided quite a lot of grant funding in relation to the to provide support during the pandemic. Some of this has been to cover the authorities' costs and lost income as a result of the pandemic, and some of it sort of just flowed through the authorities' sort of systems to third parties. So there's a risk that some of that sort of agency funding that shouldn't feature in the accounts is. So we need to make sure that the income is only recognised if it's actually true income of the authority. So that just needs to be unpicked. So those are the main risks that we see to the financial audit this year. I will pass over to Charlotte just to run through the performance audit programme, and then she'll hand back over to me for the rest, I think.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so just to run over briefly the performance audit programme for 22-23, the assurance and risk assessment programme for this current year, the main focus is going to be on the Council's financial position, capital programme management, its use of performance information and setting of wellbeing objectives. Have some information on the timing of some of those. So the setting of wellbeing objectives is likely to be the first one that we undertake. We'll be issuing a project brief to the Council next month and discussing the timing of that work. The financial position and capital programme management modules probably won't take place until Q4, just so we can take into account the current year's financial position. And don't have timescales yet for the use of performance information, but I will update you on that as soon as I'm able to. The output for this piece of work, there will be a summary report issued, it'll be next summer for the 22-23 Assurance and Risk Assessment Work Programme. Where the modules are undertaken well before then, we will issue an interim report to you, so you can sort of see how we've got on with those individual modules. In terms of your role as the committee in relation to this project, so as with our other reviews, it's really about you holding the executive and officers to account in terms of the findings of our reviews, and also really to receive assurance from officers that they're responding appropriately to any recommendations that we make in terms of these areas. So, sorry, I should have pointed out the 4 sort of areas that we're focusing on. Those are taking place across all councils in Wales. We will also be identifying some local areas of focus as well as those, and those will be reported in the same way to you. Then in terms of the thematic review, there's one on unscheduled care. That's going to be taking place on a regional basis, looking at how councils and health boards are working together in relation to preventing hospital admissions, as well as supporting hospital discharges. I don't have any indication of timing on that one, I'm afraid, at the moment, but we'll update you at the next committee. The other thematic review, that has now been confirmed. We'll be looking at digital, and it's likely to have an element of service user work in it. Beyond that, I can't give you much detail at the moment. It's going to be scoped over the summer, so certainly by the September committee meeting, I should be able to give you a bit more detail on that. And I think the work is likely to take place over sort of Q3, Q4. Similarly, with the local audit work, that's to be confirmed following discussions with the council. We'll decide together on what the focus of that project will be this year. And again, we'll come back to you at a later meeting to share the decision on that with you. And I think that's it in terms of performance audits. I'll hand back over to Rachel.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. I'll just touch briefly on our certification of grant claims and returns, just to provide an update there. Our 2021 work is complete. Apart from the housing benefit grant certification work, we were waiting for a couple of bits of evidence to come in on that one. That's come in now, so I anticipate that we'll provide a draft findings letter to the authority by the end of the month. And just more broadly, our grant certification work of housing benefit, teachers' pension and non-domestic rates tends to follow on in the autumn after the annual accounts is completed. So we'll bring our findings of those two at a later authority meeting, later governance and audit committee. This brings us on to our audit fee. So we consult on our fees each year, normally around August. Across the board, our fee rates have increased by 3.7%. And I think overall this has resulted in a fee increase, or an estimated fee increase, I should say, of 3.6% for the authority. So this is due to two factors. We've kept our fee rates the same since 2016, and sort of maintaining those fee rates as they were just wasn't sustainable in the current climate. And there's been an increased focus on audit quality across the profession. I'm sure you're all aware of, where were the auditors, for things like Carillion and Patisserie Valerie. So, we've invested in our quality and technical team, and created new posts and the like to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve and sort of complying with new quality standards. So that's the reasons for those increases there. But I should really stress that the fee that you'll see in front of you is an estimate based on how long we think the work will take to complete. It's set out in legislation that we just have to cover our costs. We don't make a profit off our audit work, so if it costs less than the estimate, we'll charge you less. If it costs more, we may charge you for that. So just to sort of give you a brief understanding of how we charge our fees. The audit team then is just set out on the following page. I should note that Anthony Veal, the engagement director, has been off on long-term sick. So Darren Owen, one of our other engagement leads, is stepping in to cover that post. So we're covered off internally on that front. And the sort of vacant audit lead post, we undertook a recruitment exercise last week. So I do have a name to fill in there. However, it's not been advertised widely internally. So I won't announce that person in a live streamed governance and audit committee. Hope that's okay with you. And finally then, just to come on to the timeline, the timetable. So as John mentioned earlier, we're hoping to get the draft accounts in mid-July and substantially complete the audit work sort of end of September, beginning of October, because I'm aware there's an October audit committee. So that's the current sort of thinking, although we do sort of maintain an open dialogue sort of to work with the finance team to make sure it's an achievable timeline for both of us. And we will bring our audit findings report to you, what we call an ISA 260 report, with the findings of our financial audit and all the other performance audit outputs as well. So I'll stop there, but I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sure Charlotte will chip in if there's any on the performance audit sections as well.
So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Charlotte. Very helpful, very comprehensive update. Just picking up on your last point, can I go back to John, Deputy Head of Finance, and just check that we are on schedule to submit those accounts by 14th of July, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think from the update there from Rachel, the asset valuation piece is causing us significant concern at the moment. Clearly, this has been raised quite late in the process and after the financial year of account. So I think the key piece of work at the moment is for those conclusions to be reached quickly between Audit Wales and SIPFA, and give us some clarity, I guess, on the way forward. Clearly, dependent on that way forward, it could have potential for further work to be required around valuations. So there is a high risk here that our draft accounts are going to come forward in July, potentially without valuations being 100% complete. So I think for this committee, there is a potential that a draft will come in front of committee without those in place, and then we'll work on those through the course of the audit. But this is a fluid situation at the moment. Those discussions are ongoing, but I think it's important that the committee is aware of that risk at the moment. That things may not be complete by the time the next meeting comes around. Thanks, Chair.
So thank you for that. Maybe the follow-up question then. Can this committee do anything to help you and the teams to resolve this issue?
I think, Chair, and until we have an answer on the way forward, whether that's through an indexation approach, possibly, which is a lot less resource intensive for us, or whether potentially we go down some further valuations, sample valuations, and extrapolate those until we know how we're going to approach that. I think it's just a case at the moment of a little wait and see and await those conclusions. It's not an ideal situation, but I think we've got to accept that this is an all Wales issue. There are some authorities that have completed draft accounts, and this is the standalone issue, awaiting clarification. So we're not alone on this. And it is an issue that's come late to the table, unfortunately.
Thank you. Understood. Certainly from my perspective, I'd be sort of urging to aim for a pragmatic solution, noting, of course, that this is an all Wales issue and indeed broader right across the piece. Thank you. So, questions and comments, please, from members. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Rachel, thanks. You mentioned quality, and I'm really pleased to see that investment. The kind of question, I guess, as a governance and audit committee is, how do we assess the quality of what we get from Audit Wales? I notice there aren't any KPIs in this plan. Should there be? What does success look like for us? I mean, do we get sight of those quality reviews that are done across Audit Wales?
So we, on an annual basis, have external quality reviews, the ICW, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. They send in their quality assurance team, and they look at a sample of our audits to make sure that we're in line with the quality requirements. So, as well as sort of internal sort of peer reviews. I'm not actually sure about the KPIs. It's not something that we generally report, but I'm not sure if there's a reason why we don't or can't. So I can look into that and come back to you.
Yeah, thank you. It'd be really helpful. And if your end-of-year reports, your ISA 260 includes something around, we did an annual review and we didn't find any quality issues on this audit, that'd be terrific as well. Right. Can I just pick up one last thing, honestly, Chair? Para 31, there's a set of bullet points there, and the third one down says, one of the assumptions is when we're able to resume on-site activities. I presume that's now out of date, because I don't think there's any impediment on resuming on-site activities. Yeah, granted that wording should possibly have been updated. I think the way we see our audit work being completed going forward is likely to be our teams coming together in our offices, in terms of development and making sure that, we're working as efficiently and as effectively as we can, and sort of visiting client sites if needed to clear queries, or if it's more efficient to sit next to someone to see something on a screen or to attend a meeting. Clearly, I'm sat here today, so I don't think that'll be a problem at Monmouthshire.
Thank you. Ian, please.
Yeah, could I just clarify on the asset valuation side of things? Does the scope of this include the investment assets that have been made by the council, or is it just the more internal operational assets? So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is just, given that potential disparity between the book value and the real value, if there is a disposal of any assets in the offcoming, such as a land disposal, what's the process for ensuring that the valuation that we are looking at is accurate and value for money?
Yeah. So investment properties are treated differently to operational assets, so they have to be valued on an annual basis. I suppose in one respect, you're lucky that pot is sort of outside the scope of this issue. With assets that are being disposed of, if they move to being held for sale, they should be revalued to market value at that point. So, you'd see the true market value for any disposals. I just wanted to add for context for what John said as well, in terms of this is an Audit Wales-wide issue, and where John mentioned some authorities have already produced accounts, some of them have produced them without this asset value issue included, so, it's almost to be a separate piece of audit work and brought together at the end. So just I guess for your information that, that wouldn't be a unique situation at Monmouthshire.
Thank you. Further questions and comments, please? No, I think we're done. So once again, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Charlotte. Very helpful update. Please keep us updated as we move forward. Right, moving on to the next item. We have now an update paper on various aspects of data. Papers being introduced by Sian Haywood, Head of InfoSec. I will repeat myself. Please be clear in terms of the paper's purpose. I assume we have read the paper, but yet again, highlight key points and any actions required of the committee. Thank you.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Sian Haywood and I'm Head of Information Security and Technology. I'm also what's called the CSIRO, or is that's an acronym, but it's the Senior Information Risk Owner. So I'm the person who's responsible for everybody's information in Monmouthshire County Council. So the buck stops with me. Well, actually it doesn't, because it stops with Peter behind me if anything goes dreadfully wrong, I'm sure. But I am that person in charge of all of the information in the council. I'm very, very conscious when presenting this report today that most people will be thinking, audit committee, that's to deal with finance, that's to deal with money, that's to deal with assets. Actually, and quite rightly so, because all of our money is public money and we need to spend it appropriately. Actually, most of our information is public personal information that we use in the council to operate from. And if I can use the analogy, if we lost all of our money today, if the bank account's closed, yes, we would stop being able to be putting fuel in our cars, in our bin lorries and things like that. And gradually, over a period of days, weeks, we would cease to function. If we lost all of our information now, we would cease to function instantly. We would not be able to access social care records. We wouldn't be able to access Meals on Wheels records. The bin delivery drivers wouldn't be able to access their rotas. So instantly we would be plunged into chaos as a local authority, and that has happened to other local authorities in this country. So yes, this is an audit issue, and what I'd like to ask you to do, it's very difficult for me to put performance indicators to indicate how good or how bad we are at managing our information. But my attempt to do so in this report will come to you every 6 months. And it's for you to look at the information I'm providing you with to see whether you want more, less, more detail, whether they're appropriate measures for you to be able to use to be able to manage how we manage our data and information. Being the lifeblood of our organisation, not just for operational purposes, we're also governed by legislation for information management and governance, namely the Data Protection Act and the Freedom of Information Act, because most of our information is public information and we have an obligation to be able to give that information to the public as long as it's not personal. We have an obligation to make sure that we manage our information in a way that makes it easy for us to give that information to members of the public. And not to have to spend loads and loads of officers' time trying to find that information with which to give them, as well as the information to run our operational services. So there is the legislation element, but there's also the work in operation element. As you'll all know, since COVID particularly, most of our work can be done remotely. In fact, the majority of our officers in the council don't actually work in an office, they work out in the field, and they have digital tools with which to access our information, whether they be caring for somebody or whether they be a teacher in the school or a planner out on site. And we in Monmouthshire have provided people with the ability to access that data and information. So it helps us to provide a flexible working environment, a modern working environment. All of this information management and governance is done within a team that I head up. We've got the data protection officer, which is an obligatory post for a local authority, and that happens to be Catherine Evans, who's sitting here at the end of the table today with us. And you will all get very familiar with us as officers to help you sort of manage your data and information in a worthy way. This report is presented to you in a format of figures. So there's various tables going down the report that you may or may not have had a chance to have a look at yet. But what I would welcome is any observations whatsoever, any questions whatsoever, whether they be related directly to the tables here or whether they're directly related to your role as a local authority councillor and how you manage your information and what information we can or can't reveal. So I think that's probably enough of me talking to you. So if possible, I'd like to ask for members' questions.
Thank you, Sian. So, yeah, members' questions. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sean. I emailed you some while ago with a big fire in Blenavon, which could have engulfed the data centre next door. It didn't, fortunately, and I understand we're going to move. If that had happened and had been engulfed, what action would we have to take? Where would our data be? What would we do to recover it? Have we got assurance that we got all those all those bits and pieces in place to keep it secure?
Yes, members may or may not know that we have a data centre in Blaenavon, and it's run by a shared resource service, the SRS, which runs all of our IT facilities for ourselves and a number of local authorities as well as the police authority. We're in the process of transferring that data hall from Blaenavon down into a very, very secure place down in Newport that the likes of Amazon or Microsoft will use their services as well. But like Councillor Reeson said, we had a fire next to the data hall recently, the week before last, and none of the SRS members of staff were able to access that data hall for anything whatsoever. So if something had gone wrong there, they wouldn't have been able to enter to actually look after our information. Had that data hall disappeared, we have backups in place, obviously, which are backed up some hourly, some the night before, and the backups are done online. So we would be able to actually retrieve that information up to a certain point to be able to continue to run the authority. What might be more difficult is that in some cases, the actual systems that we use to run the authority services are sat up there on the servers as well. So we may take a little bit of time contacting suppliers to be able to get the systems up and operational. But from that point of view, we are very, very safe. And actually, on that occasion, I think it's highlighted to a lot of our officers here in the council the value of making sure that all of their information is secure and what they need to do in the event of the data hall disappearing. So they got plans in place to plan how they would manage their information on the event that it disappeared.
Thank you. Further questions or comments, please? Ian again.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting reading. I've got a couple of questions, really, just for clarification. Just a brief one, the 20-day response time for FOI requests, where you say there's a 90% target. Is that target is an internal target? Because there's statutory requirement, is it not, for all of them to be done in 20 working days? So that's the first part. I've got another one to follow up. My other one, which is perhaps a bit more substantive, is the to do with the data breaches. Obviously, there are a number, quite a large number that are listed there, but it's quite hard to tell which ones we might classify as, I mean, it all depends on the subject whose data is breached, whether it's seen as trivial or serious, but to what extent do we make a grading of which ones are deemed to be more serious, but also what's the opportunity that we're taking for each of these data breaches to actually look at training and system checks to actually improve and prevent further breaches. And I'm not getting a clear sense of that at the moment. Thank you.
For the 20-day target that's not a target. That is a statutory obligation that we must meet, and that's 20 working days. The Information Commissioner's Office obviously recognised that that even though that's legislation, we're not going to meet those targets at any one time. And I believe their recommended target is 95%. Ours currently is 93%. And that sort of missing of that 95% target is a legacy from COVID, where all the officers of the council were doing different things for COVID. All of the staff in my team were doing different things for COVID. We were prioritising where our skills and expertise went. So, and we were allowed by the Information Commissioner's Office then to actually put a notification on our Freedom of Information request that says we're experiencing difficulties at the moment. We can't possibly comply with legislation, even though in every case where we possibly can, we will. And when COVID went away, people sort of thought, well, why are we not hitting the 95% again? But COVID has got lots of legacy effects with backlogs in our service areas, so that has affected their ability to actually service our Freedom of Information requests. On the data breaches, on the grading, yes, there is a certain element of do we or do we not inform the Data Commissioner's Office, when something is breached? What's the size of it? And I suppose in our minds, we address it by harm, the number of people who may potentially have been harmed by that data breach. For instance, if it was personal information regarding, a foster carer, which had inadvertently gone somewhere it shouldn't do. I mean, that's very personal information that affects the child, the foster carer, the natural parents. And so we have to be very conscious how that information may be used. If it's a one-off incident, we may manage that quite quietly as being a one-off incident, although we would always inform the people concerned. If it affected 100 users, then that would be quite a major incident from our point of view, and then we would be informing the Information Commissioner's Office within 24 hours really of that occurring, so that we can report ourselves basically and put the arrangements in place to make sure that that's avoided. For training, we have a very comprehensive training service for not just for data breaches, but how to manage information in an online cyber security world as well. The team has only been in existence for 18 months, 2 years now, and we appointed a cyber security officer, which is shared between us and our local authority partners, to provide all of the cyber security training. We have mandatory training for people on data protection and how to manage their information. A lot of that training is now done online because that's the way people work, and we don't want to get everybody together to do that. But we also visit our the various departmental management teams as well. So we can target where that training goes in children's services, for example, in planning, for example, all of these areas which are potentially high risk, or they have a high number of requests for freedom of information, or they actually have a high number of data breaches. So it's very targeted, and we're getting very good at doing that.
Just follow up on that. So thank you. That's really helpful. In terms of the criteria for escalating or for reporting on to the Information Commissioner's Office, is that a set of criteria that is written down that we would have sight of, or is that more of an ad hoc sort of judgment? Because I think it's not just, for me, it would also be not just numbers of people affected, it would be the vulnerability of the individuals that are affected that would play a part in that. So I just, from the perspective of this committee, it would be good to see a little bit more criteria on that.
As far as criteria goes, it's very difficult to put it on a tick list. Although what we do when a data breach occurs, then instantly we get informed by whoever's made the breach. Instantly, Kath, myself, and some of the other people involved in the team, as well as the cybersecurity officers that we've got, will sit there and discuss it. You know, what's the potential harm? What's the escalation of this? You know, what could potentially happen? Are these vulnerable people or are they not vulnerable people? But if that data gets into the wrong hand and is banking data, they may not be vulnerable, but it's certainly, you know, like an important thing for them not to get that breach in the first place. So every case is done on its own merits. And it's a good point you make, actually, because we could well put a tick list together so that we could grade them more structurally, I would guess, for that one.
Thank you. If I could come in there. So recognising that there's a level of judgment to be applied in assessing these breaches, I am still in agreement with Councillor Ian Chandler that some criteria could be helpful. So perhaps you could just take that away as an action and come back in due course as to whether you think it has any merit.
Yes, could I bring in Kath herself?
Hi there, thank you. My name is Catherine Evans. I'm the Data Protection Information Governance Manager. Sorry to chip in there, but Sian's quite right. We do judge everyone on its merit. As you'll see from the report, we reported 3 in the last year to the ICO, and they are very grey areas. There's nothing very black and white about when we report, because the first thing that we look at is what harm could it do, as Sian mentions. The ICO do actually have a criteria. So if you go in the Information Commissioner's Office website, when we get to the level where we think this is one we would refer, it's called the self-assessment checklist. It's very high level. Could this cause harm? Yes, no, don't know. You know, are there a large number of people involved? Is it, you know, have you informed the data subject? Yes, no. Generally with that, if I've got to the point as a data protection officer that I'm filling in the ICO checklist, then I'm reporting it to the ICO, really, you know, because there obviously are concerns where people could be harmed by this information, or a large amount of people could be harmed. So the ICO do have a checklist, but as I say, if it gets to the point where we think we're looking at that, then yes, we're reporting. We mainly do it around levels of harm and, you know, amounts of people. You know, can we possibly tell all the data subjects in a reasonable, timely fashion, or would that be unwieldy to do so? Therefore, we're going to tell the information officers first, and then we'll continue to try and let all the data subjects know. Okay. Sorry, Sian, I just thought I'd...
No, so thank you. It's a very helpful interjection. So are members satisfied by that response and to the extent that it negates the need for the action in respect of documenting their criteria? Any views, please?
I think that's reasonable. A checklist, perhaps a briefing session for us on what that checklist is might be helpful at some point down the road. Yeah.
Okay, if you're happy, thank you. I have a couple of comments, but before coming to me, any further questions or comments from members, please? Colin.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I was just going to ask Sian, and I'm not sure whether this is regulatory or policy, but would there be an information retention strategy that, so do you still have the information, and what would you be retaining that information on?
Yes, we do have an information retention strategy. You know, some of that is legislation itself, financial records, for instance. We also work on the local government classification scheme, which tells you what sort of documents must be retained and how long they need to be retained for. For instance, children's records, you know, are retained for perhaps 99 years, as opposed to a financial record, which is 6 years plus 1. So yes, we do have a retention schedule, and we're actually linking that retention schedule to our new online information management system. So it will automatically detect if it's a document of type A, that gets retained for 6 years, or if it's a document type B, then it gets retained for 30 years or whatever it may be. So we're linking those together in our new system that we're introducing shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Martin again.
Sean, thanks. It's a really helpful paper, and of course, when you get tables of numbers, there's always more questions to ask than answers on there. So you asked for sort of feedback generally, and I think some of the general feedback I'd give is under the FOI list, there's some very big chunky numbers in there, and actually understanding what the FOI requests are around. Is it around schools? Is it around bins? Is it lighting? Is it procurement? Is it councillors? What are the kind of topics that people are asking would be helpful to inform us? And the same really comes when it comes to the data protection breaches. There's 55 email breaches in there, and you said it's a substantial number. So kind of what are the reasons why we're doing that? Is it what sort of email lists are we using? Is it that simple? And really tied to that, the learning lessons, how do we change, what do we do different to make sure it doesn't happen again? And finally, my last question is, the 5.5 at the end, you talk about mandatory training for GDPR. And what you don't say in there is, we've trained 1,000 people, but we don't say, is that everyone? I presume it isn't everyone. And so what's the steps? If it's mandatory, that means everyone needs to do it. So how many have we been done, and when is the rest going to be done?
Right. I've quickly written those questions down now, so if I forget something, you let me know, won't you? The actual topics of freedom of information, they can range from anything. The majority of them are people perhaps wanting more information on the planning applications and what goes on in the planning area. We get a lot of requests from suppliers. They want to know how many laptops we have, what types they have, so they can sell us something. We get an awful lot of those. Some of the requests around children's services, what have we done with the data? We don't get as many financial requests as I thought we might, and we get a lot of requests from newspapers who are running a particular article and things like that. We do categorise them, but not down to the nth degree, because they can be so widespread and obscure that we couldn't possibly categorise all of those. We also publish them as well. So you should be able to find them on our website, I believe. Yes, so you could find the answers that we give to people. Of the 55 email breaches, they're mainly things like people have chosen the wrong person to send the email to. Sometimes it autofills a person. If I was typing in P for Peter, it will automatically fill in Peter Davis's email address for me. Sometimes, people choose the wrong person from the list. Sometimes they send attachments to the wrong people. Sometimes they attach the wrong attachment itself. And that's the general gist of our email breaches. When you consider the number of emails that go up from the authority every single day, there's an enormous amount of email traffic. So actually 55 breaches is quite small in the context of the number of emails that we get. But there again, we discuss them, we grade them, we decide whether it's a big breach or a small breach, or something that we can get somebody to sign a disclaimer for, saying, actually, I'll delete this information you've sent me, because it shouldn't have come to me in the first place. As for, what was the third question? Training. Obviously, when we put the breaches into the service areas, it'll lead us to analyse the risk of the people doing things incorrectly in those service areas. So, of course, that means they become higher priority. So it does, the information that we've got in here, in this report, we actually use ourselves for operational purposes. If we see the number of data breaches going up in a certain department for a certain type of thing, then we will quickly go in and do a training session with people. And incidentally, talking about training, we've got one for members tomorrow. So it'd be great if you actually turned up for that one. Yeah. All of our training is targeted. It is mandatory, but with the best will in the world, a lot of people don't actually get to to do the training. They may be field operators, in which case they may not have the instructions from their managers and things like that. But we are addressing all of those issues to make sure that everybody's trained as much as everybody else. Because let's be fair, if you were a field operator, if you were operating the bin lorry, you need to be conscious that you're holding people's personal data when you were doing that. So we need everybody to be as aware as everybody else.
Thank you. I do think we need to move on, but before we do, maybe just one final question from me. And I suppose it could be in two parts. How would you characterise the culture around data security within the council? And then secondly, what, if anything, can this committee do to help you do your job and improve that culture?
That's a really good question, and thank you for asking that, because we've spent an inordinate amount of time changing the culture of the way people think about information, because it's been on the back burner for such a long time. People don't understand the value of information, but also making sure that people understand the value of information to the local authority, to use for data purposes, to use for planning purposes, to use for statistical returns or changes in service, because things are changing according to the statistics that we have in. So that value of data and information is massive to us as Monmouthshire. And we have a data, digital and information group that we've got together, which includes Matt Gatehouse and his team, and Richard and his team, which, so they manage the data stuff. We give them the information to churn out the data, and the digital people manage, how we can get that data digitally. We've made leaps and bounds input into the culture. We've got digital data protection and cybersecurity awareness week this week. We hold one every 6 months. So you'll be receiving emails, or you may not actually, because you are members. You should be receiving all of the events that are going on this week for Cybersecurity Week. You can help us, all of you members, by understanding the importance of information and how easy it could be for somebody's behaviour to actually result in a data loss or breach. It's sometimes such a simple thing. If we get a phishing attack in and somebody actually responds to that, we could lose all of our data. So for us, we do spoof phishing exercises so we can, again, target the people who are training. But the culture of the organisation is slowly coming around to understanding data and information, reporting the breaches to us now, which they never used to do, and asking us for our help. You can help me by doing the same and attending the training tomorrow.
Thank you. Great. Let's move on then, please, to item 9. Item 9 is the 6 monthly update on the progress on unfavourable audit opinions. It's being introduced by Andrew Waffen, yet again, our Chief Internal Auditor. I'll repeat myself. Please be clear over the paper's purpose. I assume we have read the paper, but pull out key matters for our attention. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So this is one of the regular reports that I'll be bringing into committee. It's a 6-month update on unfavourable audit opinions. In terms of the audit opinions, I alluded to that in the governance statement, that we have substantial, considerable, reasonable and limited. A definition of those are outlined in the appendix attached to this report. This report is based on those unfavourable opinions, so all limited opinions which we've issued over the last few years. For this purpose and for this in particular report, I'd like members it's just for members' information this time around, and I'll explain why in a moment. So it's for information purposes, but also to endorse the report. I'd be grateful if you could do that. So generally, I would be bringing this report to you to give you the heads up that when we've done our internal audit work across all the service areas, we've identified some particular areas which have resulted in a limited opinion, a limited internal audit opinion. That is as a result of when we've actually done the groundwork, there are more weaknesses identified than strengths in that particular review, and we would risk rate those individual weaknesses as well, and that's outlined on the appendix. So I would give you some information about why we felt they were unfavourable. The key, a summary aspect of how we've arrived at our opinion, in that the key weaknesses identified would be brought to your information. This time round, there are none. There are no limiteds for the period we're looking at, so there's no summary to provide to you. If I felt that there were no strengths in a particular review and there were all weaknesses, then I'd be recommending you to the chair and to members to call in their respective service manager and a head of service to justify why that would be in their particular service area. The second element would be if we've done an audit review which has resulted in a limited opinion and we have an agreed action plan with the service manager and we go back and we do a follow-up audit some 6 to 9 months later and the opinion has not changed, some improvements may have made, but overall the opinion stays limited, then I would consider that to be 2 consecutive unfavourable audit opinions. I'll be bringing that to your attention as an audit committee, governance and audit committee, and again, Chair, recommending to you and members to call in the respective head of service and operational manager to justify why the action plan has not been addressed. So they've not made the improvements that they agreed they would make during that timescale. Then it would be up to you as committee members to challenge that officer and hopefully get some assurances that improvements will be made moving forward. And then I would do a second follow-up audit in due course, which would be incorporated with my next audit plan. And at that stage, be bringing back a third audit report with hopefully an improved audit opinion. So this time round, we're not in that position, Chair. We haven't got any limited opinions to report into committee this time around. So this is just for information, but just to give you a background of where we are in the last couple of years. 4.3 outlines a number of limited assurances which we've issued over the last 5 years, albeit this report is up to September 21. Then I go into detail of a position statement of where we are against those limited opinions. So in the past, some officers have already been called into the formal audit committee, but for in 17-18, we issued 8 reports with a limited opinion. 6 have been followed up with an improved audit opinion. So hopefully that gives you assurance that officers took our reports seriously, they implemented with a majority of recommendations and improvements have been made. In the table set out on 4.5, there are 2 reports there. There's events follow-up and food procurement. In terms of events follow-up, the way in which we deal with events within the organisation is subsequently significantly changed, and that we don't hold large-scale events anymore. But if we did, then there are expectations that an action plan would be implemented, and we would go in and follow up that particular review. Food procurement, due to resources within the team and the impact of COVID, that has been delayed. The follow-up of that has been delayed to the end of 21-22. 4.6, in 18-19, we had 6 reports with a limited opinion. 2 have been followed up and received a more favourable audit opinion, so that's good. The remaining 4 are listed in the table below. 3 of which are yet to be followed up, again for the reasons outlined previously, but you'll note that attendance management was followed up and was given a reasonable assurance opinion. 4.7, in 19-20, we issued 9 reports with a limited assurance opinion, and they're listed in table below. You'll note that most are, well, some are schools and some of our tourist attractions. Impact of COVID again, unfortunately, meant that they were either closed during the pandemic. There was a priority given to the education of pupils within the schools, and access was limited during the pandemic. So they are yet to be followed up, and they've been incorporated into my audit plan for 22-23 if they've not already been followed up at the end of 21-22. As mentioned, 2021, there were no limited audit opinions. We had very limited audit coverage across the board because of the pandemic. And up to the end of September in 21-22, we've issued no limited opinions at that point. There have been 2 limited opinions issued since, up until the end of March, and I'll be reporting those to you in my annual report and the next 6-month update of this particular report. And again, just as a bit of background, when I'm reporting to the individual service manager, we outline all the strengths, we outline all the weaknesses, we develop an action plan which is agreed with the service manager to implement all the recommendations which we make to make those improvements. So hopefully when we go back and we follow up, we see more strengths and weaknesses, hence there will be an improvement in the overall opinion. So there is a responsibility on service managers as well as my audit team for following that work up. Appendix A Chair just outlines the definition of what our opinions are, and also outlines a definition of the risk rating we give to the weaknesses which we identify. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. A couple of points from me initially. So firstly, thank you, very helpful report. A lot of information there that we need to consider. I think primarily the report is for noting, but I think you asked us to endorse the suggestion at 2.2, whereby should we be dissatisfied with an audit opinion or progress made, officers be called in to explain themselves. I think personally think it's a very good proposal, and I look to the committee to comment upon that in due course. You also then went on to say that 2 reports have been issued with a limited assurance opinion. Personally, yet again, I'd like to see those in full, please, and I'll ask committee members in a moment whether they'd like to see them as well. If so, I would suggest they be submitted to the next committee meeting, please. Those are my initial comments, but please, members, questions or comments for Andrew? Peter.
Yeah, excuse me if this is a question that perhaps should be addressed to the head of service rather than to audit. The reference to large-scale events that you made, I'm assuming that dates back to some musical events that were held at Caldecott Castle some time ago. And that lessons have been learnt from that. But of course, you know, when there's an event, a large-scale event, lots of events are still held, and quite rightly too. I think it was the Beer and Cider Festival at Caldecott Castle last week or week before, which I didn't go to. And I do have tickets to a musical event at the castle in August. How are we ensuring, I mean, if we're sending no large-scale events, what procedures have we got in place to ensure that we don't run the risks that such events created, but that we still monetize assets like Caldecott Castle to their maximum extent?
Yeah, I just want, if it's okay, Chair. I guess I just want to draw a distinction here between events that the council itself runs that are large scale, or where, let's take Caldecott Castle as an example, or events where the venue is in fact hired out to another provider who will bring all of the requisite expertise in to deliver those events, and obviously the responsibility falls upon them because obviously the income generated is theirs. It's just the higher fee that comes into play there. And Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I reflect back to obviously the limited audit opinion, obviously with events previously, that's where the council, and you rightly touched on music events, that the council in fact ran itself. And it's those that brought the recommendations brought forward previously. And just to reaffirm Andrew's earlier comment, I think the council's moved on in with the experience. The events operation the council has is very much different now. So that risk, I guess, doesn't introduce itself. Andrew, for you to if you want to comment further.
I have nothing to add to that, Chair.
Right, thank you. That's very clear. I mean, it might be worthwhile sometime in the future to have a look at the rates that we are charging for hiring out of our assets and whether we're getting, the maximum amount possible without being unfair to potential hirers, and particularly penalising local people who might want to hire those sort of assets.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Easton, did you want to come in at that point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm not a lone voice in Caldecott anymore. My question is about agency workers. In 2018-19, you were going to carry a limited and medium and limited investigation into agency workers. We're now in 2022. There's a new contract coming in place, or in place, I'm not quite sure. There are concerns across the country about agency workers, how they're treated, how they're paid. Where are we in this particular investigation with agency workers? Has a new contract been signed? Is it beneficial to our agency workers? And have you got any further comments on that?
Okay, thank you. In terms of your comments, Councillor, it's not an investigation that we were looking at. It's an audit job that we were looking at. It's not considered to be a special investigation. It's part of our follow-up review. I believe a new contract is in place, the details of which I'm not au fait with. I'm not the manager of that particular contract. We would look to make sure that there are key controls in place in terms of operating that agency worker system. So making sure that the key aspects would be in place to safeguard sound financial management across the board, governance arrangements, risk management, etc., which is my role as internal audit. Some of those questions might be better placed to the actual manager of that particular service. But in terms of an audit perspective, we have followed that work up. I think we're discussing a draft report at the moment, and that information, in terms of the follow-up opinion, will be presented into Governance and Audit Committee in due course.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll follow that up. I'll follow that up myself.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Chandler.
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to, it's a similar type of question, I guess, but it's where the risk has been identified as high in particular, but there's the revised opinion be followed up in 22-23. So I'm looking primarily, for example, at the passenger transport vehicle maintenance, which I have to declare an interest. I have 3 children that go on a school bus, so I want to know those buses are safe. So where there is a high-risk thing, what is the process between you identifying it as a high risk and it's only a limited opinion, and you doing a revised opinion status, which is going to happen next in this current year? What's the process that's happening to actually remedy that risk and to deal with that? Are you involved with that, or is that just purely at the level of the service head?
Thank you. In terms of the level of risk that's quoted here, it's the risk we perceive there to be when we do the audit plan. So based on the information we're aware of at that time, in terms of, from an audit perspective, is it high, medium or low in terms of what we need to cover? So that is our risk assessment. In terms of the risks that you were talking about, that is more of an operational level, and the manager of PTU would be better placed to respond to that. But we would pick up any concerns in terms of the operation of how that PTU is being run, how it's being managed, to make sure that those kids on the buses are being safe.
Chair. I guess, and this is a comment away from Andrew, because obviously Andrew's perspective is one of Chief Internal Auditor. But what Andrew will know, because we've strengthened the dialogue with the strategic leadership team in recent years, and really to try and assist and support progress and improvement, I guess, and responsiveness to the reports that Andrew's brought forward and his team. Obviously, there is a responsibility at the top table in making sure when limited audit opinions come to the fore that they're acted upon promptly. Now, in the cycle of audit and audit follow-up, with the pandemic in train as well, has caused a gap, as you can obviously see within the report in terms of timing. But certainly at the SLT table and with directorate management teams of the chief officers, it's making sure, you know, those conversations are taking place. It's very clearly known and understood the progress that needs to be made, because certainly the very last thing you do want is 2 limited audit opinions in succession. So when the follow-up audit comes through, you know, I don't think anybody wants the badge of having, you know, a limited audit opinion followed up again in succession. So that, you know, the progress needs to be made, and certainly within a limited audit opinion, in the way that Andrew explained much earlier on in the meeting, there will be recommendations that will be marked of higher risk than others. It'll be those ones where the conversation is had to make sure that they are acted on very, very promptly.
Okay, thank you. Any, Colin, please.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about attendance management. Andrew, I don't know whether just some sight of that paper from March 21 would suffice. I just thought that it's you know, a solid indicator of corporate health. So it's maybe something that you want to pursue beyond reasonable.
Thanks. That comes down to our audit opinion again, of the appropriate controls in place when we expect them to be in place. We identified some weaknesses initially when we did the audit, and we agreed an action plan. The majority of those actions were implemented, but not all. It did make an improvement such that we could quantify that into a reasonable audit opinion. Again, due to the limited resources within the team, that then goes into the audit planning cycle. So it would be involved in my strategic planning process, but we wouldn't necessarily pick that up on in the next audit the next audit year or the year after that. We would risk assess that at an annual basis to see if it would be warranted to include that in our plan or not. Generally, when we've got reasonable opinions, they become a lower risk for us. So we don't aspire to get to a substantial risk. That goes into the planning process because we want to concentrate on the higher risk areas where we have concerns more so than a reasonable audit opinion.
So would that relate to the hard numbers when it comes to attendance management? So, you know, would we have seen an improvement over that period, that, you know, that there was an issue in that policy that was addressed and perhaps an improvement was seen?
Yes, you would have, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's been reported into committee previously. We've outlined the reasons why we felt it was unsatisfactory, why it was a limited opinion. So you'd have had a summary brought into the committee about our concerns. What you wouldn't have had is the outcome details. It was just assurance from me that we've done the follow-up, we've checked to make sure that those actions have been implemented, we're satisfied that those actions have been implemented, therefore there's an improved opinion. But if members so wish, I can bring further information to committee at some future date.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please do so, Andrew. Okay. Martin?
Just one last one. So you were trying to sum up that. I could see that one. Just to endorse your comment at the beginning, Chair, about receiving limited assurance reports, I think that would be really helpful. And just the other kind of elephant in the room with this paper, it's data up to September 21, and I just wonder why it's been reported so late in the day to this committee, because I presume the end of year one will be part of your end of year report, which will come to our next meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, timing of reports, timing of governance and audit committees. Unfortunately, we didn't have a full program, meeting schedule. Some meetings were cancelled, so it's a timing of events, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. I will try to conclude now. So we note your paper, endorse your proposal set out at paragraph 2.2 about inviting officers in to explain progress or lack thereof. And the committee would like to see those 2 limited assurance audit reports you've referenced. Thank you. We'll move on then to item 10. Okay, so from my perspective, this is a very important paper, and we as a committee need to be satisfied that the plan is sufficient, sufficient for our purposes. I note the disruption caused by COVID-19 pandemic, some challenges over the apparent effectiveness of the authority's governance arrangements, changed ways of working across the authority, and possible sort of impact on control. I also note as well the resourcing shortfalls in the audit function and the time taken to sort of close out those vacancies. So for me, that presents a significant changed environment and potentially higher risk. And us members of this committee need to be comfortable that the plan as set out, as I say, is sufficient and will give us confidence to provide assurance to the full council that controls are adequate. That's my sort of opening sort of introduction, but please, this paper now be introduced by Andrew Wathen, Chief Internal Auditor. As per usual, assume we've read the paper, but set out those matters you think pertinent to this committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the draft internal audit plan for 22-23. This is our work programme for the internal audit team, what we think we should be covering across all service areas. This is the actual audit work which we're going to undertake. And for members, this is to ultimately approve my plan, to make sure you're happy with it, but also have the opportunity to comment on it and to shape it if necessary. It has gone through senior officers, has gone through to SLT and heads of service for their commentary about shaping the plan. In terms of the overall responsibility, it is still my internal audit plan, and I have overall responsibility for it, but I do welcome comment from heads of service and SLT in order to shape that particular plan in terms of if there's any significant areas which they feel I've missed, and I've received commentary on that accordingly and taken it into consideration. So it is draft, but if members could approve it, then that would be great. It moves to final. But that said, it still needs to be flexible enough to respond to any risk profile changes during the year or key issues which we may pick up, either from our work we undertake as an audit team or from yourselves as members of Governance and Audit Committee, where you feel there are certain areas which might require an audit more so than others. And if there are any significant changes, then I'll agree that with Peter in the first instance as a Section 151 officer, and then bring that to your attention as a Governance and Audit Committee. So just to underline that, Chair, the purpose of today's report is to comment on the audit plan, but also for members to approve the draft plan. So in terms of the planning process, this is our operational plan. We do have an internal audit strategic plan, which is a very long list of what we could potentially cover in terms of audits across all services provided by Monmouthshire. And we have to prioritise that work. So we start off with a very long list. We whittle that down and prioritise into a long-ish list. And then the next stage, as I said, is taking on board comments from service managers, SLT, etc., in terms of further prioritisation, and then matching that to the resources we have within the team. So for 22-23, we will risk assess the strategic plan at an operational basis. So there might be things that drop off the plan for various reasons, and they become low risk or lower risk, and they might inevitably not be resulting in an actual audit, because we will risk assess on an annual basis. So there might be things that some schools, for example, we haven't covered in 21-22. They would go into our planning process for 22-23. Generally, we would try our best to cover those areas off and include them in the plan. But if, for example, we included School A, and during the year we identified specific problems with School B, then we would swap the two. So although we didn't cover School A in the particular audit year, we would move that backwards in terms of our strategic plan because of other priorities or higher risks in a different school. So we start off with a number of available audit days within the team based on the resources we have. And if we had a full complement of staff, obviously that would increase the number of available days. We then take off an allowance of leave, sickness, training, management time, etc., to give our total number of operational audit days. So for 22-23, we have 658 operational audit days. So that's the work we've got to, so the available days we've got to cover all the work across all service areas, detail of which I'll come to in a moment, and that's included in the appendix. We do include 70 days for special investigations. So if we get any allegations of fraud, corruption, misappropriation, non-compliance with policy, etc., then my team do get involved with that to a certain extent, but we do have an allocation within the plan for that work. As mentioned, we share the plan and give the chief officers, heads of service, an opportunity to shape the plan based on their knowledge of where they want the assurance, where they feel there's a need for internal audit in a particular year. And that works well in terms of the communication we have from that sector. There are things within the plan which we have to do on an annual basis anyway, such as the annual governance statement. We coordinate the National Fraud Initiative, NFI, within the team, and we undertake some grant claims where the funding organisation specifically require an internal certification rather than external certification. So those are given within the plan and they're already incorporated. The team itself is headed up by myself, Chief Internal Auditor. We've got an audit manager. We have one principal auditor, 2 senior auditors and 1 auditor. So the work is undertaken depending on the responsibility of that particular officer within our team. Just to make members aware, I provide the Chief Internal Auditor service to Monmouthshire on a collaborative basis, on a 50-50 basis with Newport City Council. So 50% of my time is shared with a local authority. When pulling this report together, we had 2 vacancies in the team, audit manager and senior auditor, and we're progressing the recruitment process in terms of getting those posts filled as we move through the year. And I'll be reporting back to committee in terms of the progress on that, Chair. In terms of the plan itself, I'll be reporting progress into Governance and Audit Committee on a quarterly basis of how well we're getting on with the work that we planned. But to give you an indication of what areas we'll be covering, that's shown in Appendix A. There's a summary across all directorates. So hopefully you can see that we're trying to cover as many directorates as possible with audit coverage. And then into the detail of the audit plan on Appendix 2. So those are the individual jobs we aim to cover during the year 22-23. It is a bit of an extensive list. I'm sure members have had time to consider that. As I said, Chair, it does need to be flexible. It's not entirely set in stone, but it does need to be flexible enough to respond to changes in the dynamics of service provision. So you'll note at the very end that we have a plan for 658 days and the resources we have available are for 658 days. And happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive introduction. So to summarise, you've set out very clearly the process for establishing the plan. You want the committee to, at this meeting, feedback on its contents, and then, subject to that feedback, approve a plan, noting that for any material changes subsequently, you'll bring that back to this committee for noting and or approval. Thank you. Questions or comments, please? Ian, please.
Yes, I mean, I suppose it's a question. It's quite hard sitting here to make a judgment about whether this is a good audit plan, because you've talked about the bigger audit strategy with the list of everything you could, and we don't really see the criteria for why you've chosen what you've chosen. So I suppose what I was asking really, you talk about an audit cycle and just picking out something very easy. I mean, you've picked out 2 of our secondary schools as part of the audit cycle. What's your expectations on how often you would be auditing a secondary school? So when would we expect to see the other secondary schools appear on that? It's those types of questions, I suppose, I've got. It's that criteria for making that choice. You've talked about high risk and low risk, but I don't get a sense of the cycle that underpins that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So comprehensive schools, it's unusual for us to have 2 comprehensive schools in 1 year plan. We would normally have 1 comprehensive school and several primary schools. So our cycle would normally be around about 5-6 years for a comprehensive school, depending on the risk profile. And in terms of primary schools, ideally once every 5 years, but that's extended over the years because the resources in the team have gone down. So we're probably working around once every 8 years within schools, albeit we can go into a particular area without notice if there's a need to. If we feel there's a particular issue, then we can go in unannounced. In terms of our financial regulations, that's incorporated within my responsibilities. In terms of the 5-year cycle we've kind of got a rough idea of when we would like to cover certain areas. And as I said, we risk assess that on an annual basis. We need to take into account any known issues in that particular area, the budgetary control element of that, whether there have been any frauds, misappropriations, etc. in that area that we're aware of, any significant changes in system, any significant changes in personnel, management of that particular system, any known facts from an internal audit perspective across Wales, across the UK. You know, what's flavour of the month in terms of high risk within service provision within local government. So we need to take all of that into consideration, which we do behind the scenes, to whittle our long list down to a longer list before we get to the shorter list and the operational plan.
If I can just follow up, I mean, thanks for that clarification. I suppose it's the more general point I was looking for rather than the more specifics of those is how are we, as you're asking for our approval for this audit plan, how are we able to make that judgment on that audit plan? I suppose that's what I'm floundering at a little bit in terms of just what's their criteria for saying, yeah, this is a good audit plan or not, if we're not party to that behind the scenes. I'm not expecting we should be necessarily party to the full detail, but I suppose it's that sense that I don't have I'm not quite sure where we go from here, you know, in that. And maybe some of the colleagues on the committee with more experience in this matter, they might help me on that.
Yeah, I think just I can completely understand the question that you ask, Councillor Chandler. There is, and Andrew does have, a working document that's far more detailed than that. We get to see that as a strategic leadership team because it's then and therefore taken away into splinter conversations between Andrew and relevant chief officers in terms of that discourse and dialogue. Ultimately, and it's an important point, it's Andrew's plan, but in that dialogue, that discussion around risks, emerging risks, you know, that plays out. Capacity becomes an issue as well. You know, we can talk about the degrees of strain on various parts of the business at any one time. So in that dialogue and that negotiation, there's the balancing, isn't there, of risk with the ability for a department to be able to have to take upon it a level of audit work at a very busy time, and within the cycle that Andrew's talked to. So there is that detailed working document. It's quite a messy document. I don't mean that in a critical way, but there's a lot of information in there. It goes way beyond what you've got there appended to the report. And I guess some of the discussion is as to whether, you know, when you talk about bumping audit work, it's, you know, I don't mean it in just a frivolous sense. But there is a constructive discussion that goes on as to whether if something's bumped and deferred a year, Andrew's obviously got to take a view just in terms of the level, you know, the risk. Is he prepared and comfortable with that happening, and within the confines of the days that you've got, and making sure that, you know, focuses on the right things in any 1 year. But Andrew, I didn't want to give Andrew a hospital pass in the sense of having to clean up the working document if that was going to be shared for information separately.
Yeah, I just say I'm not looking to have a vastly long document. It was more a rhetorical question, I think, of just, and perhaps Chair would, answer that. Just is what basis can we actually approve this? Because I don't have a problem with it. It was more a theoretical question, I suppose.
For me, it was a really important question and a good discussion. May I just say a few words in the first instance? For me, the heart of this matter is what reliance can be placed on the audit function, so its effectiveness. And for me, it's about, sort of us as a committee taking a view on the adequacy of the authority and the influence of the audit function of the Chief Internal Auditor, the capability and capacity of the team, the robustness of the process followed, and also the quality of the engagement of officers in terms of developing that plan. We are not well sighted on that at this point in time. It's something I've mentioned to Andrew and others, and I think they will take that away as an element to come back to give us that additional confidence. But Andrew, did you want to say a few additional words on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and we will take those comments away and we will reflect on those definitely. In terms of your experience within the organisation, it will become more familiar the more we report into Governance and Audit Committee, the more reports I can present, the more communication we have, the more challenge you put to me. All that hopefully will give you assurance that it is an effective plan. In terms of being a good plan, it's coverage across the organisation to give you the appropriate assurance. That's my aim. Am I giving you the appropriate assurance to enable you to say yay or nay, we're comfortable with this or not? And if you're not, then my work needs to be directed elsewhere. So from what's been presented, hopefully you can see that there's coverage across all service areas. Again, as you become familiar with the way the organisation works, some of the key systems have been incorporated. We've incorporated payroll, creditors. So there's some big financial systems there. There are non-financial systems. There are establishments. So you've got a flavour. But again, the more I report, hopefully the experience will be greater, and we can have that conversation in due course in terms of whether it's a good or effective audit plan.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, could I ask a question about enterprise? Does this include the industrial units that we have and the retail parks? I'm just new to the audit, so I wanted to clarify in my own mind what enterprise actually stood for, really.
Okay, sorry, just seeking upon a clarification. So just in terms of, and I think you've probably got, is it still classified as Enterprise Directorate within the plan? Yeah, so what is now Communities in Place, formerly the Enterprise Directorate, that doesn't include within it landlord services, that sits with me and within my wider portfolio, and within landlord services, industrial units forms a component part. Okay.
Thank you. Further questions, comments? Martin?
It was the question I posed of Audit Wales, so I guess I should pose it to you as well. I'd expect to see something in here about KPIs. How do we measure our performance? I'm a little nervous, given the limited resource we've got, that the 975 days available shrinks down to 658 actual audit days. I understand there's leave and training, etc., but it seems like a big chunk of time. Included in there is admin, and I don't quite know what that is. So, yeah, just to understand what performance, again, how do we hold you to account in terms of good performance?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very valid question. In terms of the plan, it's just coverage of what work we're going to undertake. In terms of the quarterly reports that I'll feed in, based on Q1, Q2, Q3, there'll be coverage in terms of our progress against the plan, what audit works have we undertaken, what opinions have we issued, either in draft and final, against this plan. There'll also be another element to that, which will be performance assessment. So that'll be based on the performance indicators we use within the team. They will be progress against plan in terms of percentage, how timely we're sending out draft reports, how timely we're sending out final reports, whether there's been any turnover in the team, whether we're responding to special investigations within a timescale, and our there's one other as well, but which will become more familiar with you as we progress through the quarters. In terms of quarter 4, that's a wrap up within my annual report. But that information will be presented to you in due course, Chair, as part of the quarterly information.
That's really helpful. And if I could just add one more, I think the so what element, but internal audit, the value that internal audit really does add to an organisation. I'm a big proponent of internal audit, despite my challenging you. But I think it's so what improvements were made to the control procedures in the organisation, what value for money improvements were made to the organisation as a result of audit recommendations. That's something that's vital, I think, in terms of demonstrating the value of internal audit. That's hard to put a KPI on that, but it's something that's really important in terms of, as a result of internal audit, we saved X million pounds of tax ratepayers' money.
Okay, thanks. An interesting question. We don't particularly look at the value for money side of things, but we will consider your comments and reflect on it and report back in due course.
Okay, thank you. I have one question on scope, and I'll try to articulate this as clearly as possible. We've talked about the data centre, which I presume holds Monmouthshire's data. Do you directly audit that data centre? If not, who does? And then how can this committee get comfortable over the quality of that audit programme and the reliance placed upon that audit activity, please? As an example, but I'm sure there are other collaborations as well.
Thank you, Chair. We don't audit that organisation. It's called SRS. It provides an IT service to ourselves and our neighbouring authorities. Our colleagues at Torvine internal audit team, they are the internal auditors for SRS. They have a plan which they take to the board, and then they report on an annual basis, similar to what as I've suggested today. In terms of their opinions on the work that they've undertaken, that'll be incorporated within my annual report from a third-party assurance point of view.
Thank you. I suppose from my perspective, I don't quite understand what the inherent risks are of that data centre in terms of what data it holds, nor do I understand at this stage what other collaborations there are. So I'm just trying to get a sense, maybe on behalf of the committee, what risk is directly covered by your audit plan versus the risks which sit outside, albeit you obtain assurance and provide that to us via different means. I just think we need to understand that a bit more clearly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Primarily the team audits all of Monmouthshire's systems. So the internal audit team at Monmouthshire does not get involved in any audits of any collaborations. So what we will do, we will list the key ones for you and bring that back to the committee's attention in due course and identify who those auditors are. Mainly Torvine are the internal auditors to provide that level of assurance, and they do their planning as they see fit in terms of their risk assessment. In terms of the joint crematorium, then Newport City Council are the internal auditors for that particular collaboration. But in terms of the other information, we'll look into that, and again, we'll bring that back to committee.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions or comments on either that collaboration element or the overall plan, please? Seeing shakes of heads. Okay, so to conclude then, I think this committee is content with the process followed for establishing that plan. We have provided some points of feedback for noting, and we therefore on that basis approve a plan on the understanding that any material changes or challenges you will bring back to the committee for information and approval as required. Right.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Richard Jones, Performance Manager here at Monmouthshire Council. My role involves supporting the implementation of a range of the authority's performance management arrangements, along with my colleague Emma Davis, who's sitting at the back as well. So those arrangements include things like our strategic planning arrangements, our service level business planning arrangements, strategic risk management, and also self-assessment, which I'm going to talk to you a little about today. The purpose of the paper is to brief the committee on the self-assessment process we have in place to meet the requirements of the Local Government Elections Act. It's here to ensure you understand the process and your role in self-assessing the report when it comes to you at your next meeting on the 14th of July. And just to clarify at this point, Chair, that will be updated on your planner, the next item, accordingly as well. So the full report will come to you at your next meeting, but today it's to give you a bit of context about the process and where we are in that process. So when the report does come before you, hopefully you're well versed and can use it accordingly. So I'll briefly cover the process we've been through and also then a bit more about your role. So the self-assessment is a new requirement for Welsh local authorities created as part of the Local Government Elections Act, and the Council has a duty to publish a report setting out the conclusions of the self-assessment once in respect of every financial year. Appendix 1 of the report gives the committee an overview of the process that has been followed to complete the draft self-assessment report, and the self-assessment report itself has been embedded as part of the Council's performance management framework. So rather than see it as an additional process, we've looked at how it can form part and utilise the existing arrangements we had in place, and that's set out in Appendix 2 for you. I won't go through each part of those in detail, but I'll just give you a headline, if that's okay, of the processes. So what will the report cover? The report will evaluate progress under each of our 5 priority goals, which are set in the Council's corporate plan, and those also serve as the Council's wellbeing objectives, which is a requirement for us under the Future Generations Act. The report will evaluate key activity delivered as part of interim coronavirus strategies that were sometimes referred to as plans on a page, and they set the Council's direction during the last 2.5 years during different stages of the pandemic, when planning to be more flexible to adapt to much more rapidly changing and evolving circumstances. And the final substantive part of the self-assessment report will look to evaluate the effectiveness of what we're calling enabling arrangements or functions, and these are arrangements to support Council deliver its objectives. So things like our performance and risk management arrangements, our financial planning arrangements, our workforce planning, procurement, assets, digital and data as well. So all things I think have come up at various points in your meeting today as well. So hopefully this report will set in context how we're assessing the effectiveness ourselves of some of those arrangements, in addition to the range of information you'll receive on them from various other authors' reports through the committee's agenda. So where are we and what process have we followed to complete the report? So the evidence to inform the report has been gathered from a range of sources. These mainly include evidence already held, but sometimes new evidence. So things you've heard today, for example, such as the annual governance statement, which Andrew presented, that's informed some of our judgments, things like the Audit Wales work programme and outputs of that, and that's informed our work programme, and things such as colleagues such as Sian and Kath have presented as well around some of their reports. All that has been used to inform our self-assessment report, and we've drawn all that evidence together, and then for a process of what we call workshops with different parts of the organisation, challenge that to answer some key questions about how effective and efficient we think we are as an organisation and where we can get better. And some of those questions, I won't go through each of them, but in point 3.8 of the report, you can see set out some of the questions we're trying to answer. And we're currently at the stage at the moment, having held those workshops, and they were held around May, June, started this month's time. We are now putting all that evidence together to produce the draft self-assessment report for you, which will be presented to the next meeting. So that's where we are in the process. In terms of your role, and we'll go through this again when we present the report next time, as a Governance and Audit Committee, you have an important role in contributing to the report. You will need to review it to inform your role of seeking assurance of the effectiveness of the Council's governance and performance management arrangements. And you also have a role, should you wish, to make recommendations for any changes to the conclusions or actions the Council intends to take as a result of that self-assessment report. And if the Council does not make those any changes you may recommend, we have a duty to set out the reasons why that is the case. And also, just to point out to the committee, your role is around the effectiveness of the arrangements. I know you've heard that quite a bit as part of your induction process. And the report will be reported to other committees as well. So it will go to the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee, who will look at scrutinising the Council's performance against that report. And it will also then be presented finally to Council, who will take the role of endorsing the report as well. And the final thing I'd just like to add, Chair, just to close the circle of the self-assessment arrangements under the Act, is that the self-assessment report is annual. It will also be supplemented by a panel performance assessment, which will take place once in an electoral cycle, so once every 5 years, and that will look to bring in external expertise to undertake, if you want a better term, a peer sort of assessment of the Council as well, at a time to be determined as well, and that will draw upon the findings of the annual self-assessment report, as well as doing its own work in its own right to assess them. So hopefully that gives you a good understanding about the process, why it's in place, where we are ahead of bringing the report to the next meeting. But happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Okay, that sounds like a very important and significant piece of work. Clearly, this committee will be very interested in seeing the output at its next meeting. But questions or comments at this stage, please? I'm not seeing any, so you've got off lightly, but we look forward to seeing the report at our next meeting. Thank you. Okay, we can move on to the next item, which is the forward planner. I'll say a few words initially, and maybe the officers will want to sort of interject in due course. I view this plan as being largely the information at this stage, and really just sets out the type of papers and reports we are likely to see at future meetings. I also take a view that this planner is indicative rather than comprehensive, and indeed I think we've highlighted some potential sort of gaps. What I personally sort of would value is a reconciliation between the papers and reports set out in this planner with our terms of reference to ensure that we are fully and effectively discharging our responsibilities. It's not clear to me that the papers that are set out here are sufficient. And maybe the officers will speak to that point, or indeed be willing to take that action in a few moments' time. But on the whole, it's a very useful document, gives us a heads up as to what to expect. I'll pause there. I'll look to the committee now for any further questions or comments at this stage, please. I'm seeing shakes of heads again. Andrew, do you want to say anything in terms of what I've said in terms of the plan being indicative and as opposed to comprehensive, and maybe sort of doing a reconciliation piece?
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing to add in terms of what needs to be added to the work programme is that on an annual basis, the Governance and Audit Committee itself prepares an annual report. That's been prepared by the former chair, and that will need to be submitted to this committee for approval before going on to council to demonstrate that we are running an effective Governance and Audit Committee within Monmouthshire. So something just needs to be added. In terms of the other commentary, Chair, in terms of the reconciliation with terms of reference, we will bring that to Audit Committee in due course. We will make sure that there's an understanding and a clear line of why the report is coming to Governance and Audit Committee and how that ties in with your terms of reference. In terms of the actual terms of reference, it doesn't actually state terms of reference, but its roles and responsibilities are actually included within the Constitution, and they stem from the Local Government and Elections Act Wales and the measure. So there are expectations and responsibilities that the members have, and this Governance and Audit Committee has. They've been documented within our Constitution. So we'll just make sure there's a clear line between the reports being presented and that information.
Thank you, that'd be really helpful. Councillor Tony Eason.
Yeah, just one question through Chair to Richard. Next meeting, you should be bringing the strategic risk assessment to this committee. Will that be on time? Because I noticed that Emma will be doing an assessment of it in October, November.
Yeah, so so the next meeting will now take the report, the draft self-assessment that I've just been describing. We bring the risk assessment to you on a 6-monthly basis. So pending the work on the self-assessment report, the risk assessment report may be deferred till September, but we'll confirm that on the next agenda item. If that's okay.
Thank you. Good. Unless there's any more, we'll move on. We'll note the planner and note the improvements to be made to it. Okay, item 13, to confirm the minutes of the previous meetings, those being of 28th of Feb and 6th of June. As I understand it, these minutes need to be proposed and seconded. Given that the first set of minutes relate to the previous administration, it would be appropriate if Councillors Tony Eason and Malcolm Lane felt able to propose and second those minutes.
I'm happy to second those minutes.
Okay, and I think that's done. But any further comments on those minutes? Presumably not. And the final item is to confirm the date of the next meeting, that being Thursday, 14th of July at 2 p.m. And on that note, unless there's any more, the meeting is now closed. Thank you once again for your contribution. Much appreciated.